Okay, students, you're very welcome. This week is our Graduate Advice Week, and it's a series of events that we're running here in the Career Service that are looking at how you make the transition from being a student to being a graduate, and ultimately to being somebody out there who is successful in the world of work. So my name's Anne Duff. I'm one of the careers managers here in the university in the Career Service. And I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by some very expert voices from across the labour market spectrum. So what we're going to do today is we're going to let each of these commentators say a little bit about where they're positioned within the labour market, the data that they use, the point of view that they have, the perspectives that they're coming from, and just talk a little bit about what their observations are around the labour market, because it's absolutely impossible to make good career decisions without good labour market information. And LMI is a term that we use in careers work that's, you know, it sounds a little bit unfriendly, but actually it is one of the most fascinating and the most useful parts, I think, of my job, at trying to pull in all the labour market information and understanding what's actually going on out there in the world of work. Because once you know what's going on out there in the world of work, then you're better equipped to make your career decisions within it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go around all of the contributors and just ask them each to introduce themselves, say a little bit about who they are and what their point of view is, what perspective they're coming from, what qualifies them to comment on the labour market. So very excitingly, everybody's waiting with bated breath to see who's first on my screen. And it is Chris. So Chris.
Oh, thank you, Anne.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Chris Ree. I'm Head of Commercial Services at JISC, and the part of JISC I work in, along with my colleague Mike, who's also on the call, is prospects, and we're responsible for student advice, guidance, etc. And in the world of LMI, Luminate is our platform where we produce research and information and analysis and all the kind of information Anne was just mentioning about explaining the world of work. So really delighted to be here today and look forward to talking to you shortly.
Thank you, Chris. Mike.
My name is Micha-Shannon Smith. I'm Assistant Information Analyst for Prospects Luminate. And as Chris said, that's where we host most of our LMI information. And yeah, look forward to speaking to you.
Thank you. Ashleigh?
Hi everyone, I'm Ashleigh McCulloch and I'm the Youth Employability Director at the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. The reason I'm along today is because we work across a number of different projects looking at employability. The first one being the Glasgow Employment and Skills Board, which is a board of 35 of businesses across the region, and we listen to them and we hear what their challenges and perspectives are around the world of work so that we can react and help design services for them. I am also the programme manager for developing the young workforce, which is a Scottish Government-led programme which brings employers closer to education so that we can create experiences throughout education of the world of work and help people either inform their choices of what they're going into or prepare through mock interviews or different types of experiences. I was also the lead for Step Up Glasgow, which offers paid work placements for school leavers. And as a chamber, we ran a gateway for the Kickstart process. So in the past year, we've had around 600 young people into paid work placements through those schemes. So we've worked directly with those employers and those young people, getting them into employment.
Thanks, Ashleigh. Nicola?
Hi everyone, it's good to be here. So my name's Nicola Thomas and I am the Head of Research at the Institute of Student Employers. So we are a not-for-profit organisation based in London, and we basically pull together a range of different stakeholders. So we represent hundreds of different employers who recruit students and graduates. We also pull together the education sector and a range of different suppliers who are involved in the process of graduate recruitment. And we really understand what's going on in the labour market, as well as doing projects on behalf of the government, working with Office for Students, and keeping our finger on the pulse of all things graduate recruitment. So really excited to discuss what's happening in the graduate labour market with you.
Thank you so much, Nicola. And Ella.
Hi everyone, great to be here today, and well done for making it to a webinar like this on a Monday lunchtime. Really great to have you involved, and hopefully you can take something useful away from it. My name is Ella Frances. I've worked in early talent for 5.5 years, and I work with a number of clients across technology, financial services, commercial brands, helping them build, attract, recruit, and then actually run and design development programs for people who join early talent programs. So I've worked with loads of different brands, understand what they're looking for. And then I also spend a lot of time working with these organizations, consulting them on actually what people like you are looking for in the world of work, and making sure that we're shaping opportunities that are going to help you thrive and get the best out of the world of work. So it's really interesting that we're thinking about kind of data from the labour side of things. So I also spend a lot of time actually collating data from students, apprentices, grads, to really understand how organizations can create opportunities that are going to be kind of most suitable for you as well.
Fab, thank you very much, Ella. And can I just say to all of you who are on the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to position them to our panelists. Can you use the Q&A function rather than the chat function? And I will moderate any questions that come in and ask them to our contributors. So can I start then with Chris and Micha to sort of tell us a little bit about a national perspective, because you're positioned very much nationally, aren't you?
Yes, we are, absolutely. And Mike is going to talk through some of the, sort of top level data that we know about and are sort of interested in at the moment. And I'm going to follow on with a few themes. So Mike, if invite you to start, thank you.
Okay, afternoon, everybody. Me and Chris are just going to touch on some of the big themes around the graduate labor market. It's a broad area, so we're just going to draw out a few points that may be of interest. As I'm sure many know, young people were particularly hard hit by the pandemic as vacancies collapsed, and many employers canceled internships and work placements and apprenticeships. Payroll data from the Office of National Statistics shows that about 70% of people who lost jobs between March 2020 and May 2021 were under 25s. However, despite people predicting like a collapsing graduate labor market, it held up quite well. It's actually been quite resilient despite everything, and young people's employment prospects began to improve from spring 2021 onward as employment levels began to recover. And with job vacancies now at record levels, Institute for Student Employers research suggests that graduate vacancies have now actually surpassed pre-pandemic levels as opposed to collapsing, and set to increase by 20% compared to pre-pandemic levels in 2019. Just looking at some Scottish data, over Q1 in 2022, the unemployment rate decreased, while the employment rate increased, and economic inactivity also decreased. The estimated unemployment rate in Scotland is down compared to pre-pandemic levels at 3.2%, and actually below the overall UK rate at 3.7%. And the estimated employment rate in Scotland was at 75.6%, which is actually up on pre-pandemic levels as well, and up 1.4 percentage points over this quarter. And vacancies, of course, all industries are actually up in comparison to last year, with the top 5 increases being seen in technology, oil and energy, consulting, accounting and professional services, engineering and industrial industries, and banking and finance as well. Apprenticeships were also hit quite hard in the pandemic, but 2022 looks like it could potentially be a big year for apprenticeships, especially as many employers are now delivering an increased number of the work experience opportunities online. And like, for instance, you have government agencies like with civil service plans to deliver thousands of high quality apprenticeships across the UK by 2025. Moreover, as a key part of the government's plan for growing the economy and creating high skill, high wage jobs across the country, the Green Jobs Delivery Group aims to create nearly 500,000 skilled green energy jobs by 2030, which is positive. And one notable development since the beginning of the pandemic is the rise in flexible working, with many working from home as a result. And in early March 2022, I estimated 21% of the workforce were using a hybrid model of working, and organizations expect about a fifth of the workforce to work from home all the time moving forward, and about 2/5 to work from home on a regular basis. And many employers actually found that working from home has actually helped to improve work-life balance among many employees, and employee satisfaction is also up, as well as employee well-being. And just pass back over to Chris.
Thanks, Mike, and wanted to sort of draw out on some of the themes there, and I suppose some of the things that are preoccupying us and the people that we talk to. The picture really at the moment is very, very buoyant, isn't it, for the job market and for opportunities for students and graduates, and certainly much more than we probably feared or even modestly hoped for a couple of years ago. But there's a really interesting dynamic going on at the moment, where on the one hand, in certainly many areas, there's lots of opportunities, there's growth, and some of the big growth areas that Micah touched on there. But employers in some areas certainly are struggling at the moment to recruit. It's an extraordinary period. There's a lot of opportunities, but some employers are finding it difficult to fill those vacancies. So I'll talk from I suppose a personal work-related perspective at JISC. We've never known a time when it's taken longer to recruit talent, and it's been a hard process. And it seems as though I think there's a certain sort of mismatch or disconnect, as they say, between what's happening out there in the market and maybe what some students and graduates think and feel is the reality of it. We know that there are issues around graduate confidence and student confidence, inevitably, on the back of what's happened over the last 2 years, and certainly around things like the collapse of certain types of work experience, and that's been compensated for to some degree, but it hasn't been a normal period, has it? And I'm conscious of saying this because every single one of you in the audience might not have any issues with confidence whatsoever or resilience, and that's that, so it kind of makes it redundant in this case. But I think as a general rule, there have been issues, and we've just completed actually our annual student and graduate survey. And interestingly, over the last 2 years, motivation was a real issue for the respondents. It's much better this year. But the most important thing, the most important factor that our respondents are saying across all types of student, whether you're first year, third year, graduate, etc., is to do with well-being and things around mental health. It's not getting a job. That is not being listed as the most important thing. So clearly there are important personal and well-being issues which are coming to the fore. And it just makes for a really interesting time, because employers, of course, have always understood that things around well-being, student welfare and graduate welfare, health, etc., of course, are critically important. But I think now they're really understanding how to work that into the way that they engage with students and graduates. It's starting to be reflected more in literature and marketing and promotion for graduate vacancies and graduate schemes, etc. Because, of course, employers understand that this is a very, very particular time. It's a unique time, isn't it? We've never been through anything like it. We've been through a lot of different phases, haven't we, over the years? But this has been, on its own. So they're starting to learn new ways, I think, of engagement. And maybe that's all of these sorts of positive steps are ways of bridging this gap that there is at the moment. But on the positive side, I mean, actually, it's all positive, really, because there are loads of opportunities and loads of employers who want to get in front of students and graduates, and lots for students and graduates to do. And students and graduates are as well qualified and as well oriented as ever. But it does mean that at the moment, it's what you might call an applicant's market, I think, because employers are really, really keener than ever to get to the right students, to get to the right graduates with their amazing opportunities. And I think the applicants have, the students and the graduates, have a lot of cards on your side of the table, if you like, at the moment. And it's an excellent time to be in the situation that you're in, with a buoyant job market, with employers really, really pulling out all the stops to get in front of you and showcase their opportunities. And your own, I suppose, unique set of experiences, because with everything that's happened in the last 2 years, it's actually, on the whole, I think, really brought out some of those profound qualities around employability that, of course, you'd be really, really familiar with your work, the career service, etc. And issues around resilience and adaptability and versatility, and how to translate the often tough experiences into things that resonate in the workplace. And there's no other generation has been through that. So I think that gives you a lot of assets as well. On the general question as well about the state of the market, and this is something that has been the case for many, many years, that is the sheer number of professional types of jobs that are out there in the job market. Now, you may never have heard this before, and you may never, but this is a reality, or kind of like a myth that's trotted out as a reality quite often, to the effect that there aren't enough jobs for graduates, or graduates don't go into professional type work. And it's a way that people have of saying, well, it wasn't really much point to go to university, and you don't need a degree to get on in the job market, and all sorts of things like that. And whilst it's true, there are very flexible ways now of getting into the job market and building a career, it's absolutely still the case. A degree gives you such an advantage. And one way of looking at this and understanding it is this question of professional level work. Almost 3/4 of graduates in the last survey that was done of graduate destinations, which is called Graduate Outcomes, and it surveys, and you'll be doing this when you leave, 15 months after graduation, you complete a questionnaire and a survey. It asks you about where you're working, what you're doing, how much you're earning, have you gone on to further study, all sorts of things around your experience of work. When the last survey found that, I think it was almost like 75% or 3/4 of graduates were in professional level work 15 months after graduation, which is extraordinarily high levels. There are more than, I have to be careful how I say this, because it's one of those slightly tongue twisting things, but at the moment, here we are, there are 1 million more professional jobs than there are workers in the UK with degrees to fill them. Double the number of UK employees are underqualified rather than overqualified. And during the lockdown periods of the last crisis of the last couple of years, at different times, the number of UK workers who were in professional level jobs, those numbers rose, whilst those in other roles, i.e. unprofessional, less professional, non-professional, those opportunities fell. And that's been the story of the job market for pretty much the last 30 years, actually. It's been the expansion of professional level work. For another way of describing it would be jobs, educated, skilled labour, people educated to a high standard and to a high level going into professional environments to work, which is basically much of what graduate employment is. And during the last 2 years, graduates are much less likely to be furloughed or to be in non-graduate jobs. So that's a trend that's been persisting for many, many years, so almost as long as we've been talking about the graduate job market, etc. And it's only set to continue. This demand for educated, skilled labour is going to be the reality of the labour market for the foreseeable future. It's not likely to suffer any significant change, which means that as a graduate, you do have a distinct advantage. You're going into that upper end of the labour market, and that's where most of the better paid opportunities for advancement and career development are. Like I mentioned, employment and unemployment, and again, as a national overall picture, employment rates for graduates are 86.5%. For postgraduates, if you've gone through your first degree and then at some point, either straight after or after a period in your work, etc., you've done a master's or a research degree or some other higher level qualification, employment's 88%. And compare both of those, 86.5, 82, 88, to non-graduates. Non-graduate employment rates is 71%. So much, much higher. During times of economic hardship and crisis, like we've had recently, like we had in 2008 with the global depression, and earlier recessions and depressions in the last 30 or 40 years, graduates have always weathered them extremely well. The graduate job market is incredibly resilient. We keep using the word resilience or resilience. It's about you as individuals and graduates, but it's also about the market generally. It's always held up extremely well during difficult times. And again, it's there's no sign of that changing at all. So you are going into a job market which has always been generally very positive for graduates, and going into it at the moment with actually some getting on for record-breaking increases in vacancies, and not merely, as Micha was saying, just recovering from the impact of the last couple of years, but on their own terms, extremely, extremely positive. So thinking, and back to what Anne was saying at the start, the more you know about the world that you're going into, the better equipped you are. You've got a very, very interesting and, shall I say, positive book to read, if for want of a better metaphor at the moment, also a set of skills to learn around that, because it's an extremely good time to be graduating soon, or for the next few years indeed. Wanted to mention also something on the regional aspect, and when we use the term region, it's talking about big areas. So for our purposes, a region is the northwest of England or Scotland or London, etc. But within those regions, labour markets are very, very particular. There's a national myth, going back to another myth here, to complement the one about there are no jobs for graduates. Another myth that is bandied around is all the graduate jobs are in London. Okay, and I've heard that for years, and it's partly because a lot of major national and international recruiters are based in London or the southeast of England. But it's as if you can only really do well in it as a graduate by going to London. It's inevitable at some point you have to pack your bags and move away from home and go to London to seek your fame and fortune and get a good, well-paid job and a brilliant career. But needless to say, that is also a myth with no basis in reality. About 22% of graduates live and work in London. Many of those are graduates from London in the first place. And yes, it's true that there is the high levels of graduate employment there, but the fact is the majority of graduates do not work in London and never will. Most people do not go to London to work. Most graduates, in fact, stay in their home region. And we've broken down the graduates by sort of geographical propensities, if you like. We have a number of different categories, and they include what we call loyals, and they are graduates who are working in the same region that they studied in and were from originally. So say in the Scottish context, obviously that's say you were born and brought up in Scotland, you went to university in Scotland, and you're now working in Scotland. Or similarly in the Northwest, you're from Manchester perhaps, and you went to university in Liverpool and came back to Manchester, or probably actually never left Manchester at all, because the reality for a lot of universities is they are very, very local recruiters, aren't they, of students. So almost half of graduates nationally are working in the same region that they probably brought up in and studied in. And then another almost 25% to 30% have moved back, having studied away in another region. They've moved back to the home region. So really, it's an incredible set of opportunities, again, in fact, because graduates are internationally sought after, and graduate talent, especially from the UK, which has a great reputation internationally, as you'll realise. And they're also sought after nationally. But actually, many of them choose to work because there are great opportunities in their home regions or in their home cities or their hometowns. So another point about orienting yourself, I suppose, in the best possible way for your future is to learn as much, not just about the labour market as a whole, but obviously about the labour market and job opportunities and industry and the nature of employment in your home area. because you'd be, I mean, say, certainly in Glasgow, if you're from Glasgow, obviously it's a huge economic centre with multiple types of industry and commerce, and other Scottish cities are similar, and all English cities and big Welsh cities and Irish, Northern Irish, and so on and so on. Wherever you are, there will be a labour market. In some parts of the UK, it's not as strong for graduates as others, but certainly most urban centres provide opportunities to varying degrees, good opportunities for students and graduates, much of that, again, at a professional level. So think about, in terms of your opportunities, the sky's the limit, but the horizon actually might be very, very, very local, and that is the reality for many students and graduates. There's a point around I suppose, the connection between what you're studying and where you go to work. And what's really interesting about the UK higher education system, compared to certainly Germany and France to some extent, is that I'm not going to say it doesn't matter what you study, because of course it is, it's all important, and very often it might be with a very, very clear vocational direction. But actually, for many employers, the subject of study is secondary to you and your experiences and your skills and your attributes. And that is unusual, because many countries in the world do not have that. So really, it doesn't matter that much if you studied fine art or physics or chemistry, history, geography, French, etc. As long as you have the skills and attributes for the role, because many of these employers do not specify a subject of study when it comes to their graduate schemes, for example. They're after talent, and they're after people with ambition and skills and experiences, etc. It's not necessarily the subject of study. Now, if you're studying a vocational qualification, and obviously you have to be doing to enter certain professions, because you won't be able to do those jobs properly without that kind of training. So a vocational qualification, it certainly opens up an additional set of often very attractive options. But there is not a single degree subject at any UK university, higher education institution, college, etc., that makes an individual less employable. Okay, it's all important material to support your employability and to support your general attractiveness as a proposition. And again, coming back to us speaking as an employer, I mean, we recruit into prospects, let alone JISC as a whole. We recruit into all sorts of different types of jobs, and very often things like sales or marketing or project management or content, etc. And we've taken on students and graduates from all subjects of studies and disciplines. They're interested in what you've studied, but it's not necessarily the condition, certainly for us in the types of jobs that we recruit into, it's not necessarily the precondition for getting that job. It's about the work experience that you've had. It's about your attitude, and it's about how you stand out and how you translate all your experiences and how well you communicate and how you come across and all of that, and how interested you are as well. And again, just before I finish, tying that point back to the thing about the value of the what we call the applicants market at the moment. As a candidate with employers, a real high pitch of interest in recruiting you, really, really conscious of struggling sometimes to fill. The more you know about the recruiter that you're applying to, the more research that you do about them as individuals. That's actual individual people within it as well, the people that you might be dealing with or going for an interview with. The more you know about that organisation, honestly, take my word for it, as a recruiter, that is absolute knockout stuff for an employer, especially at these difficult times, because this is true all the time, and especially important at the moment. In the transaction of recruitment, it really should be a meeting of equals. It should never be about the student or the graduate being in a sort of disadvantageous position, having to pull out all the stops to impress the employer at all costs, and the employer as some sort of remote decision maker who plucks people out as they sort of like the look of them or whatever. It's never really been about that at all. It should be a meeting of equals, because on the employer side, there's a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of risk. We as employers, we don't have a lot of time or limitless amounts of money to get into recruitment. We want to get it right, and we want to be confident that we're recruiting people that are the right fit for us, but we want to be the right fit for them as well. And I think things have changed a lot over the last couple of years, and I think there is probably a more equal understanding on both sides. And you as a candidate, as an applicant, the more you know about the employer, the stronger you are when your dealings with them, the more you understand the things that sort of make employers tick and the reasons for wanting to recruit, the more you can demonstrate that you will be that perfect fit. And there's no question in the world that you're absolutely the spot on candidate for them with all your skills, experiences, etc. I mean, employers really respond to that. So you've got some great assets at the moment, and you will have into the future, because this, as I say, it is and should be a meeting of equals. So the final point around all of that is that now and all the time, UK graduates are good all-rounders. Okay, you've got skills and adaptability to thrive in a very, very changeable and changing labour market as it is at the moment. And on the international point, this is a real competitive advantage, but I would say it's an advantage internationally, nationally, regionally, and locally. So she'll finish on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris and Micah. That was a really thorough overview of what the graduate labour market is like across nationally. There's a couple of things there that I really liked what you were saying. I really like a positive message for a start off, and I think it's really important that students and graduates hear that. But I also liked your little bit of myth busting. And I think it's interesting, your positive message about it's a strong labour market for graduates, and graduates are so used to hearing the opposite from the media, or bad news stories from the media. But what the media don't tend to do is they don't break it down. They don't break the data down and go, well, it might actually for this subsector of job seekers, it's not so great, but for this subsector, actually they're performing more, they're outperforming here, and graduates definitely fall into that subsector of outperforming, I think. So thank you for making that point. I think that's a really good thing for the students and graduates to hear. You finished there on a little bit of local, talking about Glasgow. So I think I might come to you next, Ashleigh, for we've looked at the big picture. So maybe come to you now for a little bit of Glasgow perspective.
Great, thanks very much, Anne, and thanks, Chris and Micah. I suppose just to follow on from what you were saying, so I'm from Glasgow. I studied in Glasgow. I had a slight hiatus over in Ireland, but certainly back, and most of my employment has been in the city. I'm a graduate myself. This wasn't the career that I thought I was going to have, so I think that's an important point. And following on, yes, I have a degree, but certainly I've taken what we call in developing the young workforce no wrong path, which means that there have been many twists and turns, and actually the same will be for yourselves, because many of the jobs that you go into or find yourselves in when you're the same age as me might not have been created quite yet. So you will develop as you go through the labour market. And my personal perspective is obviously that Glasgow's a great place to do that, and a great platform. The first thing that I'm just going to cover is just where I work, the Chamber of Commerce. Many of you might not know what a Chamber of Commerce is, but there's one in every city in the world, and they're all connected. So we have a Scottish Chambers, a British Chambers, and there's an international network of chambers. And it's a membership organisation, and they were established really to support businesses, but also to champion the city that they are within. So we have connections across all of the different networks and business organisations and councils and public sector bodies. And we pull together lots of intelligence, research and policy, and we help make a collective voice for all of our members. So just to give you a bit of context of where I work and some of the intelligence that feeds into us. So in my area of work, I look particularly at what the current landscape is and what the future landscape is. So I take from that lots of policy briefings and lots of strategies that work across Scotland, but also across the region. So the predominant one at the moment is the Glasgow Economic Strategy, and that looks at what Glasgow City Council and its partners are looking to do now and in the future. So they've identified 3 grand challenges. The first one's enhancing productivity. Productivity is an economic term, but also very relevant within businesses, because it means getting more from the resources that you have. And I think leading into following on from the point of Chris there as well is about those professional level jobs. As more digitalisation comes in and a lot of streamlining and enhancements are happening, what people are looking for is more professional level jobs, but they're also looking for the demonstration of skills. Skills Development Scotland and Scottish Enterprise have a big strategy called Industry 4.0, and that's about the new revolution of digital jobs and the jobs of the future. But it's a very heavy emphasis on what's called meta skills. And again, that's what Chris was talking about. So being able to demonstrate those transferable skills from anything that you've been doing in your life around communication, teamwork, flexibility, resilience. So making sure that you're demonstrating all of those skills. The climate emergency is the second grand challenge. I'll come on a bit more to the green jobs area, and that's been a particular focus for Glasgow and for Scotland. And also inclusive growth. So if you look at our national strategy at the moment, there's a very heavy focus on job creation and business creation. So a huge amount of support for people who are actually wanting to start their own business. We want to be an enterprising nation. So there's a lot of support there, not just in Glasgow, but across Scotland for people who are looking to go into that as a role, which is something you might not have thought of at this stage, but certainly definitely an option for you. So Glasgow has a highly skilled workforce. We've got a very robust business base, a renowned academic sector, and a very modern infrastructure. So what we are looking to do through our economic strategy is really focus on all of those strengths to help us meet those three grand challenges, help Glasgow and really the city region grow. What we're looking to do in terms of inclusive and economic growth is really focus on our growing key sectors. And those are digital and tech, including fintech and data, finance and business services, space and satellite, advanced engineering and manufacturing, creative economy and screen, life sciences and precision medicine, tourism and higher and further education. So those are the key sectors that Glasgow are really focusing on at the moment. News in Glasgow, it's all good news today, is that the business count has increased every year since 2013, and the most recent figures for 2021 show that there's currently 19,440 businesses in Glasgow. And this is not unique to Glasgow. This is a picture really across Scotland, but the most of those businesses that are based here are small and medium-sized enterprises. So that means that they employ less than 250 employees. Actually, the micro enterprises, so that's people who employ less than 10, is the highest percentage of businesses at 85%. Then small businesses at 11%, and then medium-sized businesses at 2.2%. So actually the very large businesses that are based in Glasgow is a very small amount. But that's not to say there aren't large businesses in Glasgow, because if you walk around, you'll see lots of large businesses in Glasgow. They're just not headquartered within the city. And I'll talk a bit more about some of those that are employing or will be employing in the city very soon. So employment stats, so Chris spoke a bit about the stats nationally. In Glasgow, the employment rate is 69.4%, and that's just slightly lower than the national average, which is 73.1% at the moment. And our unemployed rate is 3.8%, but again, that's slightly lower than the national average, which is sitting currently at 4%. News is in terms of what you would expect if you're in Glasgow, so that's higher than the national average in Scotland, but also in the UK, sitting at £627 per week, whereas for the UK it's 613, so slightly higher there, and probably reflecting those professional services jobs that we were talking about here as well. Demand in the labour market, so Chris and Micah were talking about, actually it's a great time to be coming out of university. There's lots of jobs. In Glasgow, we've got the highest density of jobs, so 1.02 jobs to every person. Scotland, that's 0.8, and in Great Britain, it's 0.84. So that's a really good statistic that actually there is a job out there for every single person. So that equates to 458,000 jobs in the city. So we still need to match those people to those jobs, and sometimes that's not quite where they match up. But actually, with the availability of roles out there, there should be one for every single person. In terms of job openings, they're likely in the future to be concentrated mainly in 4 big sectors. So we're expecting wholesale and retail trade to be a big sector for future jobs, administrative and support services, human health and social work, and accommodation and food services. So, and that's by order. So actually wholesale and retail trade is where we're expecting to see the biggest number of roles. Some of the employers are looking to actually take on lots of staff very imminently. Barclays are one, so they're going to be bringing 2,500 jobs to the city, but that extended expansion will actually create a total of around 5,000 jobs. JP Morgan have announced plans to increase their workforce, 700 in financial services, but again, the cumulative total of those jobs will be around 1,500. HMRC are likely to be recruiting. They're expecting 2,700 jobs, and the cumulative effect of that is over 6,000 jobs within the city. And there's lots of kind of smaller ones coming out there as well. I said I would come back to green jobs. So Glasgow has set itself a far more ambitious target than the rest of the UK to become net zero carbon by 2030 and a circular city by 2045. So a huge focus on green jobs, albeit every job should be a green job in the future, but certainly Scotland is already on a trajectory where they're advertising far higher rates of green jobs than anywhere else in the UK, and they already account for around 2% of jobs that are being advertised at the moment. So a very big focus on sustainability and how that's factoring into all of the jobs that are currently being advertised. So perhaps something for you to think about when you're when you're looking at roles, about the circularity of the organisation, but also what their green and sustainability targets are. That's really everything from me, but happy to take any questions from anything that I've said or anything else that you have interest in. Thank you.
Fab, thank you. Can I just ask you where you said the 4 big sectors, and you said wholesale and retail, admin and support. What was the third one, Ashleigh?
Just get my notes. So it's the wholesale and retail trade, administrative and social service, support service, human health and social work, and then accommodation and food services. And that's from the Regional Skills Assessment from July 2021. I can send that over to you.
Because one of the questions I had written down when you were talking, Chris, was thinking specifically about Glasgow. What industries or job titles are strong? Where should a graduate be looking if they wanted to stay in Glasgow? Because we do get a lot of that loyals, they're called, as you quite rightly said, Chris, and the stickers that are like, I've studied here, or I've came here and I like it and I want to stay, or I'm from Glasgow. So that's a very, very, very strong cultural fit in Glasgow, that people want to stay in Glasgow and they're prepared. What I find with a lot of our students and graduates is that they're prepared to pivot. They're prepared to go, right, well, where are the jobs? Where are the sectors that are strong? And I'll look at them and I'll look and see, you know, if that fits with me sometimes, rather than going, oh no, I'm a fintech analyst and that's the only thing I'm going to look at. I do find that our students and graduates tend to be quite flexible to look at where the jobs are. So thank you for that. Okay, Nicola, I'm going to come to you next. So Nicola wrote a very, very interesting report, which I found A, fascinating, and B, very like a laser beam. I felt like it was total like a laser beam, Nicola, into what the graduate labour market, what graduate recruitment was going to look like. So graduate development trends for 2022, I just found it was really, really interesting. So that's why I thought you would be a really, really interesting person to come and contextualize some of this big picture stuff for the students to think about what the graduate development trends for 2022 are going to be.
Cool, perfect. I've got some slides because I think it might be easier to go through with just a visual aid. So let me know if you can see the slides. Yeah, perfect. Cool. So basically, as I said, my name is Nicola Thomas, and I run the research at the Institute of Student Employers. And basically, what that means is that we collect a whole range of different data from a whole host of different employers, the biggest graduate employers across the UK. So it gives us quite a unique feel about what's actually happening in the graduate labour market, as well as for students who are looking to get work experience or for people who are being recruited as apprentices. So I'm hoping to communicate some of the trends that we've noticed, especially coming out this year, so that it gives you more of an evidence-informed point of view on how you might approach getting a job and what you can actually expect while you are entering into your first job. So just to put it in context, really, I just want to sort of first speak to some of the growth that we've actually seen through the pandemic. So on this slide, and this is from all the data, is data that we've gathered on the employers, and collectively the employers in these surveys recruit more than 40,000 graduates across the UK. So it represents quite a significant proportion of the graduates being recruited each year into formal graduate programs. So this graph here shows the market growth since the pandemic, and we can see that in 2018, 2019, pre-pandemic, and now to 2022, there's definitely been sort of sustained growth in school and college leavers, so there wasn't a huge dip there. There was a significant dip in interns and placement students. So obviously, if you've been in university for the last few years, you might have felt that experientially, where there's been less availability of doing an intern or a placement. But when we look at graduates now, as you heard previously, actually the graduate vacancies have bounced back. So they did take a hit initially in the pandemic, as they did in the global financial crisis in 2008. So some of this economic shock, but now they've sort of bounced right back, which is great news if you're looking to enter the labour market. And for further context, and there's a blog I wrote about it last week, if you're interested, it's on the Institute of Student Employers website. It was just analysing some of the labour market statistics that were released by the government last week. And as Chris already mentioned, there's an incredible amount of need now. So a lot of employers are doing a lot of recruitment, and that's really good news if you're looking for a job. When we look more specifically, and this was from the employer's point of view, so what roles are they expecting to be more difficult? So from a student's point of view, it's where is the biggest demand? And we can see that this is across the whole UK, so not specific to Glasgow, but it will give you a general taste and feel. IT roles are obviously in demand, and employers are expecting that they'll be more difficult to recruit for. So are technical and analytical roles, engineering, IT, accountancy, investment banking, science and research, legal, general management, design and creative, built environment, and so on and so forth. So it gives you a bit of a sense of there are increasing, as you probably already know, sort of prioritization and expected difficulty in recruiting for more technical roles. But that's not at all to say that non-technical roles aren't being desired, because they absolutely are. And just to give you a sense for what you may be expecting as you enter your first job, this is based off 2018-2019 data. The typical median we saw was around 30,500. That was pre-pandemic, and that was for graduates. And now we're looking at around 32,000. So that's the median. But actually, we're just running a poll at the moment to understand how employers are responding to the cost of living crisis, and a lot are boosting salaries, starting salaries. So that's good news for you. When we look now, I want to talk more specifically around the report that we did earlier in the year. And this is the sort of 5 biggest trends in student development. So on the one hand, we've got the recruitment of graduates and students, and on the other hand, it's sort of the development. So what you can expect when you enter a business, and obviously they're tightly linked. So I don't want to draw too much of a distinction, but I want to cover off the sort of 5 biggest trends that you can sort of expect to give you some more context around what the heck's going on in the world of work. The first really is that there's a move away from formal development programs. So what this means in real terms is that previously, for the last sort of 10 years, graduates have often entered businesses at one intake. So that might be in September. And there's just been one formal development program that graduates have been on since they entered the business. What we can see now is that actually there's a transition away from these formal development programs to more just bespoke training. So graduates are entering companies more iteratively throughout the year. But for your context of what you can expect, on average, for graduate development programs, the average length is 25 months. So that's of a formal development program, and that changes in duration and in days of training across sectors. So you can see that the longest really is hovering at health and pharmaceuticals, and that's 30 months, and you could expect to be in training, whereas digital and IT is on average only 21 months. So there's obviously some difference across sectors. But nevertheless, we're hearing from the employers who are members of the IAC that they're actually moving from this more formal development program and into rolling recruitment. So what that means is, instead of looking for a job at just one point in time, you may be able to get a job continuously throughout the year, which is good news from a student's point of view. Looking now at what employers are actually focusing on when they're hiring students, we can see that there's a shift away from the prioritization of technical skills like coding or more analytical skills to actually looking at soft skills or human skills or behavior and attitudes. 33% of employers said that actually their skill needs have changed because of COVID-19, which is interesting from a worker's point of view, because it's important to understand what has changed regarding COVID and what skills are now more important. And here are some quotes that I pulled out from the employers. One said that we require more digital skills with more of an emphasis on resilience, growth mindset, and self-motivation. Another said that adaptability and flexibility to work hybrid and virtually is important, as well as a greater ability to drive their own development. And another employer said that more skills are required when working remotely and independently. We need students to ask explicitly for help when working remotely, and also in hybrid working, they need to develop different ways of networking. So it's important to sort of consider, as you're moving into potentially your first job, what does this actually mean for your actual skills? And looking at what we know from employers, actually they're seeing that really working remotely is an important skill. Chris, did you have a question that you wanted to say, or was it an accidental hand raise?
I can wait until after Nicola. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Cool. So I think something to keep in mind if you are seeking your first job, it's actually good to explicitly call out that you have skills to work remotely. Give examples while you're going through the application process as to how you will have self-motivation and resilience and growth mindset to work either hybrid or virtually. When we look at some of the skills that are most likely or least likely to be developed when you are in your first posting, we can see that the least developed skills across all the employers are some of the more technical skills around numeracy, coding and programming, data handling and analysis, whereas the most likely to be developed skills, so these are the skills that you could expect to get trained in your first role, are commercial awareness, So this is more of a strength in terms of how you can see the needs of the business and plug those gaps in a commercial way. Job-specific technical skills, self-awareness. So how aware are you of your own shortcomings and your own things that you need to be developed on, and presentation skills. And just to contextualize this a little more, employers basically were saying these are the attitudes and behaviors that they're looking for in student hires and that they're training for. And you can see graduates are the dark line at the top. That really self-awareness, taking responsibility, and resilience are the top three that are being trained for. So more than 96% of employers were training for these attitudes and behaviors, and still a really high amount we're looking for emotional agility, emotional intelligence, adaptability, self-motivation, and positive thinking. So hopefully this can frame a little bit about what you would call attention to in the recruitment process. So talking about your own ways of developing self-awareness, how you'll take responsibility for yourself in the workplace, and giving examples from your wider life, like surviving a pandemic while being at university, of self-resilience and self-motivation. So turning attention now to retention, which basically means how many people are kept in the business. So from an employer's point of view, retention is actually at an all-time low, which means the most people on our records have been leaving the business, the most graduates. When we look back 10 years ago to 2011, 11 years ago, we can see that at 3 years after a graduate was hired, around 79 to 81% of graduates were still with the company. And this peaked in 2016, where 83% of graduates were still with the company after 3 years. But now we can see a downwards trend, and that's to present day, where only 71% of graduates are still retained with the company after 3 years. From an employer's point of view, it's very important to understand why this is. From a candidate or a student's point of view, it's also important to equip yourself with this understanding, because the best way that students and early career hires are actually increasing their salary is by mobility, so moving to a different organization. So it's something to keep in mind when people say that the labour market's buoyant, which means that candidates can easily change jobs. It's important to understand how you could increase your own salary and increase your own skills by either renegotiating your salary with your current employer, or by looking for a different role, which could boost your skills or employment. So this just shows some of the trends in terms of retention. And when people talk about the Great Resignation, and is there a Great Resignation for people in their early career, we can see that yes, actually the percentage of graduates who are still with the company after 3 years has decreased. But when we understand the why, I think it's a call to action for employers really to understand that if we want graduates to stay with us for an extended period of time, we need to be looking at cultural things which make people engage with their work, as well as salary incentives to help them stay, and a range of different things which will keep people in their role. One important thing I think to draw out, especially for students at the moment who are considering getting their first role outside of university, is projecting 2 years, and these were the sort of questions we asked, actually, why were graduates leaving their first role? And we could see that there was really a change from last year. And what this meant was actually 24%, there was a 24% increase in graduates moving to a different type of work or career compared to last year. And 13% increase and 12% increase respectively on graduates being dissatisfied with progression and dissatisfied with pay. And I think that's really important to call out now when we consider rising bills, cost of inflation, how increasingly expensive it is to just sort of exist in the world. It makes sense that people are feeling increasingly dissatisfied with pay, and how that will play out in the numbers in the next year is something to bear in mind when you're negotiating your own salary. One thing to call out is that recruitment is going virtual. And COVID has driven employers to adopt virtual recruitment approaches when previously they were doing a lot of face-to-face recruitment approaches. So this means that actually more than 90% of employers said that they did selection activities online. More than 90% said that they did attraction activities online. So that's looking for jobs, doing virtual career fairs. More than 90% of employers said that they've moved their whole recruitment process online, which is quite a significant number. And almost half of the employers we spoke to said that actually in 5 years' time, they still think that the recruitment process will be virtual. So what this means as a student, it means that maybe instead of going to a face-to-face assessment centre, you might be doing assessment centres online. It also means that doing things to boost your confidence in an online setting can be very helpful when you're going through online recruitment processes, like, you know, being just comfortable with Teams or Zoom, doing things like this where you practice asking questions in big sort of online spaces. So considering that virtual recruitment is likely here to stay, at least in some ways, maybe doing video interviews, etc., it's just increasingly important to get comfortable online. And finally, home working is becoming more normal in early careers. I think this is just something to call out and to consider, especially moving into your first role. When we look at actually the proportion of people who are doing home working, we can see that 40% of employers disagree that they don't require students to live where they work, which means that actually around 58% of employers don't mind if their students live close to the office or not. And when we look at the statement, we are recruiting students on the basis that they will work from home most of the time, we can see that around 16% strongly agree with that statement, 38% strongly disagree with that statement, sorry. So you can see that actually there still is an expectation that people will be coming into the office. But on the other hand, around 40% of employers neither agree or disagree. So they're open to people working from home. Whereas when we look into that agree and strongly agree, there's around 24% of employers who are expecting that their students will work from home most of the time. There's obviously sector differences here. So across different sectors, for example, retail and hospitality, very difficult for those roles to be working from home all the time. Whereas when we look at digital and IT, of course, there's the largest proportion of home-based students, hovering around 52%. 20% of employers also report that they'll be basing an increasing number of early career staff at home over the next 5 years. So if working from home is increasingly important to you, then that's an optimistic note. But what I found myself, I, for example, live in Leeds, but I'm from New Zealand. And when I took this job at the ASC, I worked from New Zealand for the first 5 months and now I've been in Leeds for the last 5 months. So it means you have access to jobs in different regional areas in the UK, which you may not have had access to before. So I think it's actually an incredibly optimistic note around working from home. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to jump in now, or if we want to move to more of a broader Q&A. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Oh, thanks, Nick. I'm sorry, I pressed it prematurely. I was just queuing up the nav bar in anticipation. But the point about soft skills is fascinating. I was just wondering whether, for you or perhaps for Anne as well, from a careers point of view, is soft skills, are they something that are innate, or can students and graduates learn soft skills and be, you know, developed to meet employers' needs? I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, definitely. So my background actually is in academic research of sort of skill acquisition. So I just finished my PhD really looking at soft skills. So it's an area that I'm really, really interested in. And I think what we increasingly find is that soft skills can be developed, can definitely be encouraged and developed. And there can also, on the flip side, be a bit of a regression in soft skills if your situation changes. And one of the things that we've found from employers increasingly is that students, because they have been virtual for a long time, they may be struggling now to communicate in business appropriate ways. And what that means is in development programs now, employers are increasingly looking to train sort of business appropriate communication skills, which is considered a soft skills, as students have been online and they may not have had that exposure. So I think absolutely soft skills can be trained. There's obviously personality impacts on how confident you may be or how outspoken you be, but a lot of things can be learned.
Fabulous. Thank you, Nicola. And I really like that you were able to focus in on the graduate labour market, specifically some of the indicators of graduates, what they're bringing, where their value is. We've spoken everybody I think has spoken about what employers want, what employers are asking for. So why don't we ask an employer what they think? So Ella, you come from a company called Wise and you deal a lot with recruitment.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so I work for a company called Wiser, and we're responsible for employer brand, attraction, recruitment, and actually running development programs. So we have this really interesting kind of holistic view as to how companies like to attract early talent and how they actually then facilitate their development when they're actually in role. And again, thinking about the perspective of so many different types of organization, whether that's digital, finance, commerce, retail, we can really start to see kind of trends across all those different industries. And I think just the one thing I wanted to chat to you all about today is thinking about the kind of impact of the pandemic. And again, we've got the Great Resignation. We've also got words like the Great Reshuffle being kind of thrown around, and thinking about how skills and behaviors have just changed so drastically in the last couple of years. And it's really got employers and people looking for jobs thinking about how they need to adapt given all these new circumstances. So from lots of businesses' perspectives, and I work with lots of companies where I've been kind of consulting them on best practices within skill development in early talent, a lot of organizations have had to change how they operate and how they make money. So for example, a lot of retail businesses, they've had to focus a lot more attention on e-commerce rather than just kind of bricks and mortar and high street. So their perspective on skills has massively changed, and they need to start seeing people come in with far more digital skills than they ever have. And equally, the pandemic has not just kind of changed up how consumers operate, but also how we work. And I know we've touched a lot on working from home. And again, like Nicola said, that has really changed the dial on how we need to operate in the workplace. So there's like Nicola said, a massive focus now on how we communicate and how we build trust as well, and how we build teams when we're not all sitting in the same room. So there's a lot more emphasis from employers' perspectives to make sure that their people have everything they need, and that they have all the tools to kind of really be successful in those organizations. I think a really interesting stat is from the World Economic Forum, which says that 50% of all workers will have to be retrained in the next 3 years, which I think just really hits home the message about digital skills and how vital they are for any future career, regardless of whether you work in a kind of a tech role, or every single role now requires some sort of digital skill. So from a student perspective, my advice would be get started on this as early as possible. Employers won't ever, your opportunities won't be jeopardized because you don't have these skills, but you can definitely do a lot whilst you're still studying to get you in the best possible position to succeed. So the three I wanted to touch on today are data analysis, agile project management, and digital marketing. I think those are just kind of three not easy ones, but I'd say they're probably, regardless of degree background, they're the ones you can really focus your attention on whilst you're still studying. There's so many resources, both at university and online on things like Udemy and Coursera, where you can really just start to level up ahead of joining the world of work. So starting off thinking about agile project management, businesses are becoming a lot more complex, and roles are starting to kind of incorporate a huge variety of responsibilities, and people are expected to juggle loads of different things because technology is making it easier for us to take on more work and to kind of take on new challenges. with that comes this greater level of organization that everyone just needs to adopt. You can't just expect to write notes on a piece of paper and hope for the best. You've got to have a kind of far more complex way of managing workload. And again, given the context of working from home, being able to communicate what you're working on with your team, timelines, what other people have got going on, and making sure you can all come together when you're not all in the same place is really important. So thinking about agile project management as a skill will be a really great thing for you to start working on ahead of the world of work. So things you can start looking into and researching things like agile methodology. So how can you use different workflows and processes to make sure that you are set up for success and that your team know what you're working on? Thinking about stakeholder communication in the context of working remotely. How can you better connect to the drivers and motivators of the people you're working with? How can you work cross-functionally? Again, it's really rare these days that you work just in a silo of your kind of immediate team. So thinking about how you can use technology to better engage a wider audience. There's obviously so many different documentation, different types of documentations and tools online. So having a really strong understanding of what they look like and how organizations use technology to project manage is going to be beneficial. And then there's also a huge piece within agile project management around risk and making sure that we're able to kind of track ahead of time what issues might come up, how we can solve them ahead of time, and how we can communicate any challenges out to the organization. And again, this isn't necessarily a technical skill, but it's a digital skill that is going to help you and enhance your career progression no matter what role you go into. The next area I wanted to touch on is design and digital marketing. Again, thinking about portfolio careers and how many different responsibilities we are all expected to juggle, a lot of roles now have some element to do with design, creativity, brand, how you speak about yourself and the company online. So regardless of whether you're in a marketing role, this is a great thing to think about. So how you can sell the brand, sell yourself, find new opportunities, whether that's on social media or any other sort of technologies that that your industry use. So thinking about how you can actually present yourself online through the power of kind of tech creative is going to be super useful. And then finally, data analysis. So again, most organizations that you'll join, you'll be expected to use Excel quite frequently. And lots of companies are definitely getting a lot better at providing Excel training. But it's definitely something, if you've got a bit of time now, just to really focus your attention on. We did a survey recently, and 73% of grads said that they probably didn't have the right level of Excel skills they were expected to know when they actually started out. So if you can kind of preempt any of those challenges and get started, there's so many courses online, and it's a really kind of great way to set yourself up for success. I think a lot of organizations still probably don't have as many automated processes when it comes to data analysis they'd like, especially on the smaller scale companies. So if you can come in as a graduate and already have this kind of foundation level of Excel proficiency, it's really going to set you up for success. And then once you've got all that kind of basic Excel, using more complex platforms like Tableau, Power BI, Google Analytics, it's all going to come a lot more naturally to you from that. So yeah, I'd say those are probably the three key areas when it comes to digital skills that will be useful in any role. That the companies I work with it's becoming more prevalent. So that's it when it comes to digital skills. Then I also wanted to touch on, and I know it was really, really interesting to hear us talk about behaviours, and we've been calling them soft skills. I always prefer to call them high performance development skills. I just think it's got more of a ring to it. So we think a lot about this, and again, touching on what all of the other panelists have spoken about, things like growth mindset, resilience, communication, whether that's written or verbal or in a remote context. Those are the most important things from my perspective that employers are looking for. And again, it just all kind of feeds back into this bigger picture of the pandemic has really changed what businesses are after, what their expectations are of their people, and how they believe that they can kind of get the best out of you. Another thing I wanted to touch on is apprenticeships. So something that we're seeing a lot more is organisations wanting to bring graduates onto development programmes which incorporate an apprenticeship. And a really interesting statistic that I found out the other week in a survey we did with over 1,000 students is, I couldn't believe this, but 70% of people who we surveyed said that if they would actually think negatively of an opportunity if they was to do an apprenticeship alongside their development programme. And this statistic really shocked me, because from my perspective as someone who works in learning and development and early talent, like there's so much benefit and there's so much value add of doing an apprenticeship on top of your career, because it's a qualification. It's only ever going to enhance what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. But there's definitely still a lot of stigma around apprenticeships. So that's just something to be aware of. If you're one of those people who thinks that apprenticeships maybe isn't the right fit for you, or that it's only in very vocational areas of work, then I would say that they open so many doors. There are apprenticeships for almost every single type of role out there in the world of work, and it's really important to look out for those opportunities and see them in a positive light, because at the end of the day, they're just another qualification for you to level up and help you progress quicker. And then I just also wanted to kind of just reiterate what some of the other speakers have spoken about when it comes to kind of green careers. And that's definitely a trend that we're seeing. Sustainability across every single sector is massively on the rise. And again, like Chris said earlier, it's quite a candidate-driven market at the moment, and you actually have a lot of power in what you want to do. And employers have seen how much kind of seen the demand of sustainability focused careers for early talent, and they're really rising to the occasion and finding opportunities to create roles and create programs that will allow people who are passionate about sustainability to really have that as kind of a central aspect of their role. And if you don't see anything to do with sustainability when you're applying for roles, my recommendation would be to ask your recruiter, ask the team you're communicating with about the role, just to see what's out there. Because if a company isn't offering anything, or they don't kind of mention anything to do with sustainability, it's always a good idea just to check in, because if it's not something they've thought about before, you asking that question might actually trigger a conversation internally where they actually think, hang on a minute, we're getting lots of candidates who are asking about sustainability, let's try and do something about this. So as a candidate, you can actually be a really kind of positive drive for change. So definitely use that. If you don't see anything and you think, actually, I reckon this company could do something pretty cool in the space, be the person to ask the question. That would definitely be my advice. And then finally, just to think about, again, from an employer's perspective and thinking about the needs of early talent and what early talent are looking for in employers, and how employers are kind of trying to meet those expectations. The one trend that we're seeing time and time again is there being a strong emphasis for learning and development. So clearly you guys are really aware of the need to upskill, and again, thinking about that stat of 50% of people needing retraining. Employers are definitely trying to kind of match that expectation, and across all of the employers that we work with, and then all of these survey results that we're seeing from early talent, it's that, the strong emphasis on learning development is the kind of number one driver for both parties. So again, if you're applying for roles, if you're looking to see what's out there, and if you don't see a massive emphasis, or you're not kind of seeing much on the website, or when you're having conversations about what learning development's out there, or what training they offer, or what qualifications you might get to do, again, ask the question, see what's out there, because it's really important that for you in your career that you're able to prioritize your learning, because things are going to keep changing. Expectations of what you can bring to a role are going to shift massively over the next couple of years. So just make sure that you're finding a company who's going to be able to support you on that. And that's about it from me. So Anne, I'll pass back over to you.
Thank you so much, Ella. So there's one question has come in, and just whoever would like to speak to this. So how easy is it to enter into the graduate job market as an applicant with a disability? Will reasonable adjustments be made during the application as standard, or will I have to ask or fight for it? Is it possible to meet the requirements for a job but still get rejected due to my disability? I see a lot of statistics about lower employment numbers for disabled people, and this is a major worry for me. So would anybody like to sort of like give a little response to that question?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. So that's a huge focus of the ISE, is working with employers to understand how best to make the recruitment process as inclusive as possible. So there's a huge amount of work going on in this space. Of course, it's possible to meet the requirements for a job and still get rejected, but it's not legal to meet the requirements for a job, want to be selected and get rejected because of your disability. So that's actually illegal. That's discriminatory. And I would say there's a big movement in the employer space at the moment to even question the phrase reasonable adjustments. Like, who's to say what adjustments are reasonable or unreasonable, right? It's just making the recruitment process and the world of work as open and flexible as possible, so that a range of people with disabilities or without disabilities, with different ways of cognitive processing, can flourish. So I think it's very important as you're going through the recruitment process to be upfront around what sort of adjustments are suitable for you, to make sure that the recruitment process is inclusive as possible for you. And I think any reasonable employer that's worth your time and would be a good place to work will be more than happy to make adjustments in the recruitment process. And if someone isn't, then I think that's a pretty big red flag for you as a candidate, and also just as a place that you'd want to work. But that again comes down to some of the transitions and changes and remote work. I think it also means that there's greater flexibility in who can do jobs and where, and there's more autonomy over your time. So I totally hear what you're saying around it being a worry, but I would also feel optimistic that you can put your best foot forward, and that hopefully many employers are flexible and really quite progressive and making sure that their recruitment process is getting the best out of all candidates.
Thanks, Nicola. Ashleigh?
Sorry, I just wanted to come in there just about the Glasgow perspective. Just don't want to make assumptions on your age or your disability, but there are services out there, and there's employers who actually advertise that they're open as well. So there's a movement called Disability Confident that employers can sign up to, and they have to actually go through a process. I've just checked the website, and there's 240 employers within Glasgow who are signed up for disability confident status. There is a programme in Scotland called the Young Person's Guarantee. So that's a commitment for every 16 to 24-year-olds to be offered a job, employment, training, or what we call a kind of a positive destination. So 500 employers have signed up to that across Scotland, and part of that, one of the asks is about a fair and inclusive employment status. So you could check both of those websites if you're looking for people who are openly advertising that they're going to be welcoming to people with a disability, and specifically target those companies. There's also support services available. There's one called Supported Employment in Glasgow, and there's another one called the Glasgow Disability Alliance, and they work very closely together. And depending on your work with them, they might also refer you to what's called the Glasgow Guarantee, which is also jobs which are ring-fenced for people with particular circumstances. So those are all areas that you might want to investigate.
And one final signposting to that, Ashleigh, is in the career service, we subscribe to an organisation called Employability. And Employability will support you as a person who identifies as having a disability into the world of work. So that's another one as well. Thank you for all that great signposting, Ashleigh, and that nice comment on it, Nicola. So unfortunately, I don't actually have time for questions beyond that one that's come into the Q&A, but I feel as if the information and the signposting and the advice and the guidance and the positive commentary and the insight that you have all given has been absolutely brilliant. And I think it's been coming from many different angles. So, I mean, I feel thoroughly informed, let alone the students. And it's been great getting it from the national perspective, getting Ashleigh, your Glasgow perspective, and then Nicola getting the graduate recruitment trends, and Ella from sort of like that recruitment point of view about sort of where digitally you should be moving into and how you should be developing yourself into the digital trends. So I feel as if there's a huge amount of information there for our students and graduates to go away and ponder on, big picture stuff and detailed stuff. So I think it's been really great. So can I just say thank you very, very much to each of you for coming along and contributing, because it's been a fantastic session. So thank you very much.